Still a little hot back there. So we're good now? All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Hope everybody's having a great Shabbat today. Everybody got good sleep, slept through the rain last night. Had to lose a boat to get here. I tell you what, I got quite a bit of rain in my house. It was great. I slept like a baby. I always do when it rains, as long as it don't thunder. If it thunders, that wakes me up. But well, today's Torah portion is Devarim, words. We're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 1, all the way verse 1 through chapter 3, verse 22. Half Torah reading will be Isaiah 1, 1 through 27. We'll be in Psalm 79 today, as well as Romans 10, Matthew 13, and Matthew 11. We'll be doing things a little different today. So bear with me. I had a drosh prepared for all of you. For those of you that are watching online, welcome. I had a drosh prepared about 2 weeks in advance for this. Had plenty of time to prepare. Man, I thought it was going great. I said, that's no problem. I got it licked. Everything's great. And then Wednesday rolls around, and I hear a teaching. And it's our normal Wednesday night teachings on the hidden ones. Well, that perked my ears up. That got me thinking. The day before that, on Tuesday, new moon. We had a new moon teaching. Well, that was all about holiness and things that are going on and so on and so forth, and about Devarim pointing towards it. And I said, man, that got me thinking. And then Thursday rolled around, and I was going over notes and watching another teaching and thinking, okay, all I got to do is just add a few little notes to my deal, and I'm good. And I got a phone call, and a text message, and another text message. I got one in the middle of the night, Wednesday night, 4 a.m. Got one at 11 a.m. I had to clock that night, too. Then I got one at 6 a.m., all the brothers. I said, what are you trying to tell me, Yahweh? So Thursday, when I got home from work, I took my drosh and I threw it in the trash can. And I started over. And I started writing. So today we do not have a PowerPoint for you. So I suggest you get a notepad and a pen handy. Get ready to write and get your Bibles open, because we're going to have a lot of things we're going to be going over today. Now, it will be a little different than what you're used to from me. Normally I teach with PowerPoints the actual Torah portion itself. Today I'm going to be preaching to you about the Torah portion. So before we get started, let's have a word of prayer. Father Yahweh, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for your Shabbat. Thank you for your understanding of the word and the wisdom and knowledge you give us to uphold it. Father, I ask that you bless my lips today, Father, and that they speak your words only, and that you get all the glory and I get none. Father, I pray that you help me to articulate what it is you want said and spoken, and may it land on the hearts of men. In Yeshua's mighty name I pray, and all Israel says, Amen. Long enough at the mountain, hearing the words and walking them out. That's my title work that I've got for you. Today we're going to be discussing the Torah portion called Devarim. Devarim means words. This opening portion belongs to the book that is commonly called Deuteronomy, and it covers Deuteronomy 1 through 3:23, or 21, or 22, excuse me. The name of the portion comes from the book itself. In Hebrew, the full opening phrase is often understood as, these are the words. But over time, it is shortened simply to Devarim, or words. In ancient times, the book was also known as Mishnah Torah, loosely meaning a second Torah or a second telling. That description fits because Deuteronomy is often viewed as a repetition, a review, or restatement of the Torah. In the earlier books, Yahweh speaks to Moshe, and Moshe relates those words to the people. But in Deuteronomy, as Israel prepares to enter the land, Moses recounts what Yahweh has spoken. He reviews the journey, revisits the commands, and speaks again to the children and grandchildren of those who first came out of Egypt. By this time, most of the generation that left Egypt had died in the wilderness. Moshe is now speaking to the generation that will cross the Jordan and inherit the land promised to their fathers. The Greek-speaking Jews translated the idea behind this book of Deuteronomino, which means second law. In that sense, the Greek title echoes the same basic idea. Moses is presenting the instructions again, not as something new, but as something the people must now hear, remember, and live. This will be Moshe's final address, if you will, the book of Deuteronomy, to his people before they cross the Jordan. For those of you that do not know, Deuteronomy was written in the final 60 days of Moses' life. In the opening part of Deuteronomy chapter 1, it states that it was the 40th year, the 11th month, the first day. And we know that Moshe died on his birthday at 120 years old when he finished writing Deuteronomy. So this is his last will and testament, if you will, his last final instructions before they cross over the Jordan. And it was written in 60 days. That is a lot of writing. A lot. It took me 48 hours to write 10 pages or 11 pages. He wrote the entire book of Deuteronomy in 60 days. He was busy. So you might say he worked right up to the end. So Deuteronomy opens with the words, Moshe spoke to all Israel on the far side of the Jordan in the wilderness. After leading these people for 40 years, Moses has brought them to the border of Canaan. That's why you see here that river you see on the overhead above me, that's the Jordan. He's brought them right to the edge of Canaan, to this river. Before they enter the land, Moses delivers 3 major addresses in which he recounts what has happened throughout their wilderness journey. He reviews the lessons of the past so the next generation can understand how they are to live in the land before them. As Moshe speaks, he's also preparing to die. He will not cross the Jordan with them. Once the people enter the land, they will no longer have Moses physically present as a constant reminder of Yahweh's guidance through the wilderness. Therefore, one of his final acts as leader is to warn them about the temptations they will encounter after crossing the Jordan. They will come into contact with the peoples of Canaan, their customs, their gods, and the practices that could draw Israel away from the ways of the Lord. Moshe reminds them of what Yahweh has commanded, what he has forbidden, what he has delivered them from, and how he has provided for them. His words are both warnings and a final act of preparation. It is much like a parent who has carefully taught a child what is right, what is holy, what is just, what is virtuous, only to see that child leave home and face the world's competing voices. Before that departure, the parent says, remember what you have been taught. Remember what you know. Remember the way you are called to walk. Remember who you are. That is what Moshe is doing for Israel. He is reminding them because once they cross over, they will need faith. They will also need spiritual discipline in order to avoid the snare set before them by the surrounding nations. A well-known sage of Israel, often referred to as Vilna Gaon, observed that the first 4 books of the Torah were heard directly from the mouth of the Holy One, blessed be He, through the throat of Moshe. Deuteronomy, however, was heard differently. According to this view, Israel heard the words of Deuteronomy in a way similar to how they would later hear the words of the prophets. Moshe himself declared what he had heard, learned, and understood from Yahweh. This distinction matters because after Moshe passed away, that would become the ordinary way that Yahweh's people received his word. They would hear it through messengers, through teachers, through prophets, and witnesses who faithfully communicated what Yahweh had spoken. That is also how Yahweh's people hear his word today. It is not a Mount Sinai experience with the mountain covered in thick clouds and lightning, thunder, sounds of a shofar. Instead, we hear through reading, studying, teaching, preaching, and the testimony of others. When Moshe walked the earth, the earlier books often say, the Lord spoke to Moshe, or the Lord spoke to me. In Deuteronomy, the emphasis becomes, this is what the Lord spoke to me, and now I'm telling it to you. In that sense, Deuteronomy helps prepare Israel for a different kind of hearing. They would no longer always stand at the foot of the mountain. They would need to receive Yahweh's words through those appointed to speak, to teach, and to bear witness. That does not make the words less important. Even when they come through the mouth of another, they remain the words of Yahweh. They still reveal his ways, his truths, and the manner of life that he expects from his people. If we had stood at Mount Sinai, we might assume that we would take Yahweh's words more seriously than we often do today. Right? Well, if I was there and saw that, I wouldn't do that. We read the accounts and we say, those dumb people saw all that and they still did so-and-so. Right? We assume that we would have done something differently, that we'd have taken him more seriously than we do. Yet, of that actual generation that was there at Mount Sinai, that did see all those things, only 2 crossed over into the land. So do you really think you'd have been any different? That suggests that the outward drama alone does not guarantee a listening heart. I'm going to say that again. The outward drama alone does not guarantee a listening heart. People often look for signs, wonders, and dramatic experiences. They look for another mountaintop moment. But Yahweh's desire is that his people hear his word, even when they come through the mouth of another. Just as Israel would need to hear after Moshe's passed away. There was a purpose for Sinai. It was dramatic. It was fearful. It was unforgettable. And it is fascinating to imagine what it must have been like. But it served its purpose in that time. Now, Yahweh speaks through his witnesses, through you, through you, through you, through you, through you, through me. and through others who bear his testimony to his word. If Yahweh always operated in the spectacular and demonstrative, people would be tempted to chase the experience rather than heed the message. Right? According to the Messiah in Matthew 16, those who seek after a sign are described as a wicked and adulterous generation. In other words, people who chase signs are not always seeking Yahweh's will or his ways. Once the excitement wears off, they move on to the next fascination, to the next and to the next, never slowing down long enough to hear the words themselves. They become bored with simple obedience, and they start chasing the latest distractions, like the book of Enoch, the Nephilim, the lizard people, the flat earth claims, the moon landing conspiracies, the different calendars of Zadok and Noach and all of those, the bloodline theories, fallen angels, and anything but the plain call to hear and obey. Anything but that. They become bored. They want that mountaintop moment. Some people need constant drama before they will actually pay attention. But most of life is not lived at Mount Sinai, surrounded by thunder and fire and shaking ground. Most of life is ordinary, routine, daily. That is exactly where obedience is tested. And that is where we must learn to hear Yahweh and do what he says. In that mundane, routine, daily, boring life is where we're truly tested. In Deuteronomy, Moshe expresses to the people his understanding of what Yahweh has spoken. In doing so, he set a pattern for generations to come. People will hear, read, study, and then teach others what they understand Yahweh has spoken. For this reason, Judaism refers to Moshe as Moshe Rabbeinu, which means Moses, our teacher. He is not only the one who received instructions, he's also the one who taught Israel how to hear, remember, and pass on the words of Yahweh. The words that Moshe spoke to Israel were given in the wilderness, beyond the Jordan. They were not spoken in the land itself, but as the people prepared to enter it. This is significant because no part of the Torah was written in the land. Did you know that? It was given outside the land, yet it provided the way Israel was to live once they entered the land. Living according to Torah in the land would also serve as a witness to those outside the land. Israel's obedience was meant to become an example for the nations. At the same time, the fact that the Torah was written beyond the Jordan also highlights Israel's history of unbelief and disobedience. 2 years. 2 years after coming out of Egypt, the people were positioned to enter the land from Kadesh Barnea. 2 years had passed. They're at this exact same place that they're at today. 2 years after they left Egypt. They were positioned. They were ready. They were at the brink. They could have crossed over. But when the spies returned, 10 of them brought back an evil report. The people listened to that report. They gave in to fear, and they began to doubt Yahweh's purpose, saying in effort, saying in effect that he had brought them into the wilderness to die. Wow. Oh, if we'd have been back there and seen all those miracles in Egypt, we would have been faithful. We wouldn't have been scared. We wouldn't have done that. Because of their response, they were made to wander another 38 years. In that way, much of the Torah being given outside the land shines a light on the unbelief and unwillingness of Yahweh's people to do what he had called them to do. You want to spend another 38 years in the wilderness? Or do you want to do what Yahweh has called you to do? The wilderness itself carries a meaningful picture as well. The Hebrew word for wilderness is midbar. And those same Hebrew letters are related to an idea of speaking. The point is that Yahweh often uses the environment of the wilderness as a place where he speaks to his people. And now you guys know why you live in Odessa, Texas. Why does he speak beyond the Jordan? Why give his words in the wilderness? Perhaps because in the wilderness, he has his people's attention. They're no longer have the comforts and conveniences. They were remembered even from Egypt. Remember that? In Egypt, they remembered the fish and the melons and the leeks and the cucumbers and other familiar provisions. But in the wilderness, it was simply them and Yahweh. No distractions. They are stripped from distraction and dependence on Egypt. Yahweh had their attention, and he spoke to them. Does he have your attention? This is where Yahweh uttered the words Israel needed to hear. We too need to hear those words, because we did not sit at the foot of the Mount Sinai and hear Yahweh speak in an audible voice, did we? So how do we hear? How do we Shema Israel? Well, Paul answers that question in Romans 10:17. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Yahweh. We need to hear the word of Yahweh spoken by others, and we also need to read it for ourselves. We need to hear faithful people share what they understand Yahweh is saying, and others need to hear what we are hearing from Yahweh as well. When we come together under the guidance of the Spirit and remain within the boundaries of Scripture, this is how sound doctrine is formed and passed on from generation to generation. We hear the words, faith is built, and that faith is multiplied as others hear the word of Yahweh. Yet one problem we often face is that people may listen to the words without truly hearing the message within them. Are y'all tracking with me? Yahushua did not repeatedly say, "He who has eyes to see, let him see." Did he? Do y'all remember that? Is that in the NIV? No. He said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." That statement implies that a person can hear sounds and still miss the message. They may listen to the words being spoken, but fail to hear the words within the words, the message within the message. See, to truly hear, we must have spiritual ears. We must be inclined to understand, receive, and embrace the word of Yahweh as it comes to us. If we are distracted by the cares of life, we may listen, but we will not truly hear. The faith that comes by hearing is not produced merely because sound waves enter into our physical ears. The word must go deeper. The word must go deeper. Deeper. It must penetrate the heart. That is how we truly hear. That is why Messiah said, if you have ears to hear, let them hear. The issue is not merely whether we can listen, but it's whether we are willing to receive the message with our hearts. Matthew 13, 10 through 14 says, And the disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou unto them in parables? The disciples questioned the Messiah. He answered and said to them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundant. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away, even that he has. Therefore speak I them in parables, because they see, seeing not, and their hearing, they hear not, neither do they understand. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which says, By hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand. And seeing you shall see, and shall not perceive. That's us. Here in Matthew 13, the Messiah explains why he speaks to the people in parables. He says that although they see, they do not truly see. And although they hear, they do not truly hear or understand. In this, Isaiah's prophecy is fulfilled. The people would hear but not understand. And they would see but not perceive what they are seeing. Their hearts had grown dull. Has your heart grown dull? Their hearts had grown dull, and their ears had become hard of hearing, and their eyes had been closed. See, the problem was not merely physically hearing or physically seeing. The issue was the heart. It's always been the heart, always has been, always will be. If they would see with their heart, with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, they could be converted and healed. Yet Messiah tells his disciples that they are blessed because their eyes see and their ears hear. They are not merely receiving words. They are being given understanding. In other words, he speaks to the crowd in parables and dark sayings because the parable reveals who is truly seeking Yahweh. That's why. I often wondered that as well. Why did he speak these people in parables? To see who truly was seeking out the Father. It distinguishes those who only listen to words from those who truly desire to hear the message. That's why he speaks in parables. Psalm 79, 1 through 3 says, Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ear to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which you have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. The phrase dark sayings here in Psalm 78 carries idea of a puzzle. You ever put a puzzle together? A jigsaw puzzle? Well, it carries the idea of a puzzle or something that is knotted together. See, a parable gives the listener something to hear, but it also tests whether the listener will press in to understand what is being said. That is why spiritual hearing matters. The parable is not meant merely to entertain or impress. It exposes the condition of the heart. The parable is not meant merely to entertain or impress. It exposes the condition of the heart. Who is truly seeking Yahweh? Who really wants the message? Who is merely listening to the sounds of the words? Once again, the issue is not whether words are being spoken. The issue is whether they are being heard. To understand the message of Messiah, one must have ears to hear what he is saying. Isaiah's prophecy makes clear that Israel's heart was dull towards Yahweh, not only in the days of Messiah, but also in the days of Moses. The people heard words, but they did not truly hear the message within those words. When Yahweh told them to possess the land, Moshe encouraged them to be strong and courageous. He reminded them that the Lord their God would go before them and fight for them, and that they did not need to fear the people or the fortified cities. Can you imagine if Yahweh said that to you today? How much more confidence you would have, knowing that he is going to do that for you. Well, they listened to those words, but did they really hear the message? Did they really hear the message? They listened to the words, but did they hear the message? Well, the answer is no. They didn't. Because their hearts were dull towards Yahweh. And as a result, they did not possess the land when they first had the opportunity. You know, even the 10 spies who brought back the evil report confirmed that the land was good and that it was flowing with milk and honey. Yet what captured their attention of the Israelites was not that Yahweh had promised, but the giants, the fortified cities, and the obstacles before them. They heard Moses, but they did not hear the message. Moses was presenting, instead of trusting Yahweh and entering the land, they focused on what they feared. Because they did not fear with their hearts, an 11-day journey from Horeb to Canaan became a generation-long lesson. Fear turned an 11-day journey into a lifetime. They could have entered the land after only 2 years in the wilderness, but instead, because they had failed to hear the message, they wandered for another 38 years until the lesson had been driven home with authority. Now, as the next generation prepares to enter the land, Moses repeats what Yahweh had instructed Israel to do and how they are to live. Here we go again. The fact that Moshe speaks these words shortly before his death gives them added weight. For many in this generation, Egypt was something that they'd only heard about. All they had ever known was the wilderness, and Moses leading them through it. That's all they knew. This generation wasn't in Egypt. They were born in the wilderness. Their parents have died off. So they don't know about Egypt except what they've been told. And here they are, All they had heard and known was the wilderness and what Moses was leading them through it. Now, suddenly, the man they had owned all of their lives was preparing to leave them. Even as they were preparing to cross into the land that they had never seen. Talk about scary. The man that they had leaned on and listened to for 38 years, that led them through the wilderness, is now telling them that you're going in without me. And trying to instruct them on what to do. But what if we need you, Moses? Sorry, I won't be there. You have to trust Yahweh. Surely that reality made Moses' words even more significant. These were not casual remarks. They were among his final appeal to a people standing on the threshold of promise. You know, some commentators understand Moshe's explanation of the law as more than a simple repetition of what the people had already heard. Moses not only restates what Yahweh had said, he was also helping unveil the deeper meaning within the Torah. In doing so, Moses was helping the people move beyond merely listening to him describe what Yahweh had spoken. He wanted them to hear Yahweh for themselves, to receive the message with understanding, conviction, and faith. That is an important point for all of us. We do not have Moses physically standing before us today, do we? I'm not Moses. I'm sure he had more hair than I do. We have the Messiah, the recorded scriptures, and the Spirit who teaches us and leads us into all truth. At the end of the day, each of us must hear Yahweh for ourselves. We can and should hear other preachers, preaching, teaching, sharing, and encouragement, but nevertheless, we must not settle for merely listening to words. We must hear Yahweh's voice within them. By reviewing and explaining these things, Moshe encouraged Israel to listen with more than their ears. He called them to listen with their hearts so they would not repeat the failures of the previous generation. 38 years earlier, the people had heard with their ears, but not with their hearts. Their hearts turned towards the evil report of the spies, and that is what they accepted. Moses now wants this generation to hear Yahweh speaking through his words, not merely to register sound, but to receive truth. If they can hear Yahweh for themselves, they will not retreat from the giants or fortified cities as their fathers did. They will be prepared to face the same obstacles with faith rather than fear. So, track with me for a second. Consider what might have happened if Yahweh had taken Israel directly from Egypt into Canaan without first bringing them to Mount Sinai. They would have had to face giants and fortified cities immediately. And they very likely would have turned back to Egypt. So instead, Yahweh brought them to the Mount Sinai. He appeared before them, spoke audibly, and allowed them to hear his voice. In part, this was to encourage them and to build confidence that he would lead them into the land. Yet when they later heard the spies' report, they did not want to fight the giants or confront the fortified cities. 38 years later, the giants were still there. The fortified cities are still there. And the generation crossing the Jordan would still have to contend with them both. So Moshe says, in effect, do not merely hear with your ears, hear with your heart. Do not retreat in fear as the previous generation did. Live out what you have been taught. The same goes for all of us as well. Long enough at the mountain. That's what my note says. Deuteronomy 1, 6 through 8 says, Moshe reminds Israel that the Lord spoke at Horeb and said plainly, you have stayed at this mountain long enough. The season of remaining there had ended. It was time to turn, move forward, and go towards the land promised to their fathers. This command left no room for delay. See, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which the Lord has sworn to your fathers. Whenever you get around to it. No, it's not what it said. It's urgency. Now. It's time. You have been at the mountain long enough. Israel had stood at the foot of the mountain long enough. They had received instructions long enough. Now, obedience required movement. The same word speaks to us. There comes a point when another teaching, another study, another discussion are not enough. The words must become our walk. For those connected to the Hebraic Roots movement, or the Messianic Awakening, whatever you want to call it, much attention has rightly been given to the Torah, the feast days, the Sabbath, and the instruction given at Mount Sinai. These matters are important, but the message now is direct. We have been at this mountain long enough. We have heard the words. We have received the teachings. Now we must live them. That is what Moshe declared to Israel. Walk it out. Possess the land. And live according to what Yahweh has spoken. In the same way, it is time for us to do more than study the Word. It is time to embody the Word. We must possess the land, so to speak, by living what we have received before Yahweh and before people. You may be the only Yeshua that anyone ever sees. When you look in the mirror, do you like what you see? We have been at this mountain long enough. By now, there should be no confusion about keeping the Sabbath holy. We know that working, buying, and selling on Sabbath violates Yahweh's instructions. We know that we are to turn from our own pleasures and call the Sabbath a delight. We know the Sabbath and the appointed days call us to a solemn assembly. Obedience cannot be reduced to private isolation, while Scripture clearly commands us to not forsake the assembling of the brethren. Simply staying home watching a live stream isn't enough. We must assemble. It's a holy convocation. By now we should know how to worship Yahweh and what He requires. Our bodies and our lives to be offered a living sacrifice to Yahweh. And worship given to Him in spirit and in truth. We have had enough time at the mountain to know how to reverence Yahweh in His house. Not treating what is common, not treating what is holy as common. Right? As living sacrifices before Him, we must approach Him with modesty, reverence, and a readiness to give our best. After all, No one would attend an anniversary dinner or meet someone important or go to a job interview dressed carelessly, with a poor attitude, or showing disrespect. Would they? So then we know how to come before God then, don't we? By now we should know how to approach Him with thanksgiving, prayer, and worship. We should also understand that talking, visiting, catching up during the drosh or worship dishonors our King and distracts those who have come to worship Him. No one would dare behave that way before an earthly king in his palace, would you? Not unless you want to go to the stockade. So we know how to approach our king then, don't we? We have been at the mountain long enough to know that corrupt speech has no place among us. Scripture says no filthy communication should come from our mouths, and blessings and cursings must not flow from the same source, just as fresh water and salt water do not come from the same spring. You cannot speak good and evil out of the same mouth and be righteous. If I offend any of you today, I apologize. But if I haven't offended you today, see me after the drosh. Maybe I can do some more. No, I'm kidding. By now, we know how to eat according to biblical cleanness, resolve conflicts in a godly manner, and honor our elders as appointed leaders and teachers. We know that a tithe of 10% belongs to the kingdom, and that our offerings include the fruit of our lips and the sacrifices of our time in service to others. We know a servant is not greater than his master, and whoever desires to be great in the kingdom of heaven must become the least and serve. By now we should know how to resolve disputes amongst the brethren. If you have something against your brother, leave your offering. Go to him privately and make it right so that you may gain him. Be slow to anger and quick to repent. Do not simply walk away from the assembly. That's the easy way out. But you also violate the Torah if you do it, because you're called to assemble on the Shabbat. All of this was taught to us at the mountain. We have had 38 years to understand it. Now we must walk it out. It's time to cross over the Jordan. It's time. I'm going to tell you a little story here as we're getting close on time. A few years ago, Bill Cloud gave a message that became known as the flashlight message. The basic idea was simple. A flashlight is only useful if it's turned on. But even turning it on is not enough. It must also be directed toward the path in order to show us how to walk. So in that picture, the flashlight represents knowledge. Turning it on represents understanding that knowledge, and pointing it towards the path represents wisdom. So knowledge by itself is not enough. Sitting at the foot of the mountain and receiving teaching after teaching is not enough. We must understand why Yahweh has given us this knowledge and why He has entrusted this instruction to us. And it certainly is not there for us to destroy each other with. Then we must seek wisdom from above, so we know how to walk these things out before our friends, our neighbors, our enemies, and the world. We are called to be a light to the nations, not merely collectors of information. For a long time, the focus has been on learning the things of the Torah. Now, the time has come to focus on how to live those things before our fellow man. So if we could summarize this message, it would be this. In the days ahead, people will be less impressed with our knowledge of Hebrew, with our knowledge of the temple, and all these related matters, and they'll be more impacted by the way our lives affect theirs. What will matter most is whether we walk out the words we have been studying. The testimony of our lives must demonstrate the truth of what we say we believe. I'll say that again. The testimony of our lives must demonstrate the truth of what we say we believe. Matthew 11 gives us a powerful example. When emissaries came from John the Baptist asking whether Yeshua was the one to come or whether they should look for another, Messiah answered by pointing to change lives. He told them to report that the blind see, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have the good news preached to them. That was the evidence that he gave. He did not point to more people learning Hebrew, wearing tzitzits, and keeping the Sabbath. As important as those things are, he pointed to the fact that people's lives are being changed for the better. I've said this many, many times right here in droshes in the past. If the Torah is not changing your life, you're not reading it right. Or you're not reading it at all. That is what it means to go and possess the land. We have heard the words. Now we must live the words before people so that their lives are touched, strengthened, and changed. We must embody what we've learned. We cannot have this knowledge and then walk around and look like everyone else. It must change us. It starts here first. If we have not learned that message, then we have not truly listened to his words. We must stop merely listening with our ears and begin hearing the words with our hearts. And to that, I say Shabbat Shalom.